Morning, everyone. Just a couple housekeeping things as we get started. First of all, recognize that everything I'm going to give you today will be available at my blog, which is just dangerouslyirrelevant.org. If you just type in dangerously irrelevant into Google, it'll pop up. Up in the top right corner has a link that says workshops. Just click on workshops, and then you'll see SAIS on the list. Okay, so it shouldn't be hard to find. Just my blog, Dangerously Irrelevant. Click on workshops. You'll find it. It's not too hard. So I'll note that. I'll also note that you know you're in the right place if it looks like this, right? Okay, so you can see SAIS across the top. You know you're there. And there's that workshop link over on the right, kind of cut off a little bit because of the resolution. For those of you who are playing along on Twitter, the hashtag is #SAIS12. So you can see there's a conversation going there. So along the back channel, I'll look forward. I won't really have time to monitor the Twitter stream over the next hour and a half. So I'll have fun seeing whatever you say about me later. Okay, so I think that's about it. Oh, one last thing. I hope you're sitting next to somebody you like, because you're going to be interacting with your neighbors here over the next 90 minutes. So if you haven't yet said good morning to your neighbor, now is the time. All right, come on back. Here we go. Let's rock and roll. All right. So let's get started with what sounds easy but isn't. We've got these desktop computers floating around our offices and our homes. We've got laptops that we're toting around. We're carrying around tablets and e-readers. We're carrying around extremely powerful portable computers in our pockets and purses. We call them phones, but you know that the actual calling somebody function is about number 5 or number 6 on the list of how we use these days, behind email and surfing the web and playing games and listening to music and so on. So sort of anachronous to call it a phone. We have portable music devices to the extent that it's not merging with this. We have digital mapping devices to the extent that they're not merging with this. We have digital cameras to the extent that they're not merging with this. We have digital camcorders to the extent that they're not merging with this. We've got lots of hardware and gadgets and technologies floating around. And we have lots of services that we're using with them. We've got blogs and wikis and podcasts. We've got online video and online mapping and social bookmarking. We've got location-based services where you can check into places. We've got all these social networks, right? We've got 2 billion people in the world using the internet. 1 billion of them have Facebook accounts. You can do the math. We've got people on Twitter, a couple 100 million people on Twitter now. We've got LinkedIn, which is about 150 million people. I don't even have a slide for Pinterest, which is now number 2 on the list. So yes, and there are actually a few men that use Pinterest. I'm one of them. LinkedIn, which is more professional social networking side, about 150 million or so. Google Plus, a new kid on the block, has already topped 100 million and climbing. We've got social networks for our younger kids. Club Penguin, Wizard 101, Webkins. This is Facebook training for the younger set. You can make your own social network if you want. Maybe you decided that you need a social network around Harley-Davidson motorcycles or quilting or classroom technology or whatever. You can use a tool like Ning to make your own. What we're doing here is we're creating a brand new information landscape for ourselves. This is not something that we've done since the invention of the printing press. And for those of you who remember what it was like before the printing press, back then most people were functionally illiterate. They couldn't read. They actually had no need to read because they had no access to texts. Right? So they had texts back then, written texts, but they were handwritten, they were beautiful, they were copied by monks in the monastery, and so on. But they were expensive. The only people that could afford them were the wealthy and the elite and the powerful. To the extent that your average citizen needed to know something, they got it by local word of mouth, or they got it by a third-party intermediary. The king's messenger came and told them what the law was, at least according to the king. Right? The local priest told them what church doctrine in the Bible said, at least according to the church, and so on. Right? And they were dependent on these third-party intermediaries to be the in-betweens between them and the information because they couldn't access it themselves. And then we invented the printing press, which made information available to the masses for the first time ever, which meant that if you could read, and this is where the push for universal literacy came from, If you could read, you could access these texts yourselves, which meant that all of a sudden you could read the law yourself and decide whether or not the king was implementing it fairly. You could read the Bible yourself and decide what it meant. You didn't have to rely on your local priest. And this was sort of a huge thing. It was called the Reformation. It upended Europe for several centuries. The ability to access information yourselves put everything in turmoil. And what's happening right now is we're living through a similar shift, except instead of removing the third-party intermediaries between us and accessing information, we're removing the intermediaries between us and the creation of information. Until recently, it used to be really expensive to create information and get it out to people at scale. Think about the costs that are involved with creating and distributing a book, or a magazine, or a newspaper, a television show, or a radio show, a movie in the theater, and so on, right? Lots of production costs and lots of distribution costs, lots of physical media costs, and so on. But we don't live in that world anymore, right? Over the last decade or so, we've evolved a new information landscape where now the costs of production and distribution are essentially almost zero. And what that means is that we all now can have a voice. For the first time ever, your average common person can have a voice and can reach people at scale. This is big. As a result, we are living through the greatest expansion of human expression in all of history. People who never, ever would have had a voice otherwise, other than very close local communities, now can have global reach. So the three big ideas for our new information landscape, we're going to come back to them over and over again this morning, are we all now have a voice if we choose to. And we can easily find each other's voices. Whatever that thing is that you care about, whatever you're passionate about, right? Maybe it's Lithuanian folk dancing, and you're the only one in the 200-mile radius that cares about that. But online, your people are there, right? They're sharing videos of the latest dance. Check out my costume, right? There's the huge discussion boards and Facebook pages. Your Lithuanian folk dancing peeps are easily accessible online. Locally, can't find them anywhere, but online, your people are there. So not only do we have a voice, but we can easily find each other's voices for the things that we care about. And once we connect with people, we can start working together. For a lot of people, it's as easy to work, for a lot of jobs, for example, it's as easy to work with people halfway across the globe as it is halfway across town. We have voices, we can find each other's voices, and when we do, we can work together. And those three big ideas are upending everything, particularly because we have the ability to do those things on these tiny devices that we're toting around. Wherever we are, anytime, anywhere, we have those three capabilities. So this idea that we can grow up and have the ability to be publishers, not just consumers, for our youth, is a radical, radical mindset. And we as school leaders are just now starting to recognize what that means for us, for our institutions, for our society, and so on. We are not prepared for this idea that students can have a voice, that youth can be publishers and content creators and authors and can reach people at scale. We're just starting to recognize that instances like this kid who plays the guitar can reach 90 million people, right? And these sort of instances are commonplace. You could all point to viral videos where, some local individual who never otherwise would have had a voice is now reaching tens of millions of people. We know those. We're getting used to that idea. But what we haven't done is we haven't extrapolated that to the bigger idea, which is this. A 12-year-old can now have the potential audience reach that used to be reserved for a major media company. We haven't made that mental leap yet. But that's the world we live in now, right? And so what's happening, because we all have a voice, we can find each other's voices, and we can work together, is that our information landscape has changed itself from a transmission mode, a broadcast mode, where big central entities that could afford to be creators at scale, the government, corporations, some media companies that were designed for that purpose, right? They broadcast out to you, they created materials, and they distributed to them. What did we do? We received them passively, just like you're doing right now with me. We received them passively because we didn't have the ability to play in that space. But now we do. It's no longer a unidirectional broadcast transmission information push-out space. It's now an interactive web. Because they push stuff out still, but so do we. They put stuff out, we complement it, we supplement it. They put stuff out, we contradict it, we rebut it. They put stuff out, we take bits and pieces of it, a little here, a little there, we mix it up, we mash it up, we create new value out of it. We have the ability to play in the information space too. So instead of a unidirectional push-out space, a broadcast space, it's now an interconnected web. It's much more of a dialogue, it's much more of a community with interactions going all directions. This is a place where you're active, where you're interactive, where you're social, where you participate. You don't just consume. You get in there and you mix it up and you play. So now the question becomes, for you and your neighbors, do you play? Right? How many of you have uploaded something in the last week to the web for somebody else to see? Like maybe 20% of you? So here we have, maybe a little more than that, maybe 25% of you. So here we have this interactive, active space that our youth are growing up in, where their mindset, their default mindset is, I can play, I can participate. And the adults that are supposed to be preparing them for this space, in this room, only about a fourth of you understand this space, are in this space, are participating in this space, and so on. Something to think about. So the question for you and your neighbor, I'll give you about 3 minutes to talk about this, is, are you an active participant in this interactive, social, participatory space, this new information landscape that we're creating? If so, how? And if not, why not? Go.